first talk of the new year. So I'm going to be using you guys as a bit of a sounding board, and I hope I can get your feedback on this. Now, this picture here on the title slide is actually some pepper plants that I just happened upon in some nursery a couple months ago. The importance of it is, A, that I posted this to Instagram, and I was going back to my Instagram folders and thought this would be cool visually, but also when I was looking at these, I realized that when I came across these, I walked into this building and just saw this sea of colors of these plants. And it wasn't until I got closer and saw each individual potted plants that I saw what was actually going on. And then, of course, being curious / adventurous, I decided to buy one of these plants to take it home. I thought it'd be cool to have some really nice hot peppers available in my kitchen. And when I did and I brought them home, they weren't hot at all. So I acted upon assumption, thinking I was taking a risk, and in reality, I was just making an uninformed decision. And this is what trend spotting really all comes down to in libraries, is try to figure out how to strategically analyze trends that are going to impact us so that we can most quickly understand what the benefits, challenges, and costs are going to be. Now, it's 50% being able to look down the pike to see what's happening. And this is important for absolutely everyone in the information industry. And but what's really important for each of us as library staff members, no matter what type of staff or what type of library we end up working in, is being able to make those critical analysis decisions about what the impact for not our library is going to be, but the impact for expectations for discovering and engaging information. So I'm Joe Murphy. I am an independent technology consultant for libraries. I formerly worked at the Yale University Science Libraries, which I resigned my position there last fall so I could focus on this area of interest to me. This was something that turns out there was a bit of a niche for, and it was really fun for me to focus my work helping libraries keep current. So I decided to do this full time. And I love the opportunity to be able to work with student groups, especially Assist, because you guys are the ones who are going to be making the impact, and you're the ones that I need to have in my personal learning network. So let's make sure we do network, that we're connected on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook, etc., because I would really like to get the benefit of having you guys inform me so I can stay current. So if that's cool, let's make sure to be connected. So when I'm looking at what the major technology trends are as we go into 2012 with full steam, I see some broader trends that are framing the conceptual ideas of what the biggest technologies are. And those concepts that I'm looking at tend to be focused around, or at least some of these bullet points that I've listed here on this slide, of the idea of self-curation and personal creation networks, the concept of using visual elements for discovery, for social interactivity, for sharing, and for actually actualizing activities. And location continues to be a major concept with technology trends this year, whether that's location-based check-ins, location discovery, or the idea of proximity between the user and the resource being a point of access. And then in content, it's a very exciting time, obviously. Some of the biggest things, though, I see are a concept of personalization for the reader and for the content creator. And of course, that "and" is becoming a smaller and smaller gap. And we'll talk about some really fun examples of that. And we're actually not going to talk too much about, but if you want, I can mention a few of the current communication tools. This is a really fun subfield of seeing what's big and what's changing in mobile and social communication so that we can look at library services, especially reference. And actually, one of the first things that I'm going to focus on is a social network that a lot of you have probably heard of and a few of you are probably already using, and that's Pinterest. Pinterest is, well, actually, I was hoping that this slide would include a blurb, and it looks like I didn't format it right, but Pinterest is an online self-curation pinboard. They call it a virtual pinboard, or it's kind of like one of those things you stick pictures or notes to so you can keep track of them. What this is like, it's like a visual version of Delicious. You take an image you find online and you add it to your Pinterest pinboard, showing that you want to share it with people or you simply want to remember this image or this web page. So what's really interesting about it is that it's actually, one second, I'm trying to see what's coming in the chat. So is what's happening in Adobe Connect mean we should stop temporarily? Do we need to pause? it's just the nature of webinars that something always goes wrong, and it's usually my fault. Okay, so we're not going to pause. So back to Pinterest. Now, what Pinterest is it's a way to not just bookmark, but share and keep for yourself and a designated group an idea or an image or a place that you want with a visual element. Now, the reason this is of interest to libraries is actually, I've had a lot of discussion with people who don't believe it really is unless you're an art library or an archives, but everything has a visual element. And people tend to remember and enjoy discovery through that visual element. So no matter what it is, there's something that people can relate to that you can share, or most importantly, you can facilitate collaboration through. So if you're not already a Pinterest user, then I suggest you seek an invite and you try it out. Now, I wrote a blog post about how to use Pinterest in libraries last month, and when I was writing this and thinking about the applications, I realized that they're actually quite diverse. And I wasn't the only one thinking about this. There was also a great blog post by David Lee King and many others since then. And if you want more information, I'd also suggest you check out the many stories about this that have been on the technology news sites, especially Mashable. So how would you use Pinterest in a library? You could use it for to post pictures of new books or books about a theme or a display, or for a reading month, etc. You can also post images or pin images from the community, whether they're pictures that have been taken to the web or pictures that people have taken at the library, or things that people in the community have done, like their books, etc., or events. You can bookmark resources that you want to share just as you would with an online research guide or a Pathfinder or a LibGuide. There's no way it can't simply be visual and transfer it over into a pin board. Also, you can use it to actually collaborate or facilitate collaboration between end users. Really, no matter what type of library you're in, our goal is to facilitate the creation or consumption of knowledge, and this is a great way to do it because pins can actually be boards can be collaborative efforts. You can create one and invite your community to add to it, and vice versa. You can also use it for simply adding a human and social element to your library by allowing us to, or your staff members, to post pins of relevance to them, of interest to them, showing that they can be part of the community. And it's easy enough to do. The way that you add pins on Pinboard is either with a bookmark within a web browser, where you just it's a small code that you can grab from Pinterest, and it's a pin it button, and then whatever image it finds on that page, you can add to your Pinboard. You can do it manually from Pinterest.com or from the mobile device. The mobile device is actually, or the mobile application is a really great way to access this resource. So the reason that this is important to libraries is actually not just because it's a useful social network, but because it starts to get into some of the major themes we see going through discoverability, content, and social networks this year. And that's the idea of creating and leveraging the visual element for online resources with the ability to personalize and customize. Let's actually jump ahead from here to something else a little closer to content, and that's Flipboard. Flipboard is a really, really interesting iPad and now iPhone application that was originally developed to be able to maximize the iPad touchscreen. And what it is, it's a social, customizable magazine-like content consumption app. So it's really just a way that you can choose what content you want to read through this app, whether it's social streams like a Twitter feed or Facebook or Instagram, or proprietary content like magazines, whether it's subscription or not, or online sites that are streaming. Now, so you have the ability to control what you consume, and you get to consume it visually again. So it looks like it's a beautiful modern version of a magazine, and that it's touchscreen, but it's like pages. And they recently released a iPhone application, which was kind of weird because it was developed originally to really maximize that iPad screen. But the iPhone application is fabulous as well. And apparently it was a good move because right away the statistics were through the roof. It was downloaded more than 1 million times in just 1 week of being of being put out there, and it was called the iPad App of the Year, so that alone means we have to pay attention to it. And it's growing at phenomenal rates. It has such growth that the advertising has started to kick in and reap some really nice profits for them, but more importantly, they're starting to make really big partnerships. The Oprah magazine was actually the first proprietary subscription content to be allowed into it, and if readers are going to start to pay to have access to content through this, then it's absolutely something libraries have to start thinking about. And it's going to be a really interesting discussion as we start to work with content providers and figuring out how to make sure our end users have access to proprietary content, with the libraries continuing to fulfill the same role of being that content facilitator. So the major points for Flipboard, and again, I suggest that you download and give this a try, is that it's visual browsing, it's customizable, and it's social. So check out Flipboard. This is going to be the most important trend for how we consume content is going to change, not just over the next year, but it's already impacting it now. And then, of course, with Apple's news last year, we have some really interesting disruptions in textbook publishing. Now, they may not radically change the world of textbook publishing, but it definitely is going to shake it up a bit. And there's two elements here: the iBooks authors and the iBooks textbooks part of it. Now, for the iBooks for authors is Apple's way of allowing self-publishing within their content store. Just like you can actually self-publish your books through the Kindle store, but what Apple is doing is taking the model that's been so successful with iMovie and GarageBand and turning authors, or amateur authors even, into published authors through the Apple Store. Now, if you do create something through here, you can only sell it through Apple. So a lot of people are worried about that, but that makes sense from Apple's point of view. And the iBook Store is no small thing, so that's actually a fabulous way to be able to sell through. And the way you do it is with a really neat application. You can import text, create full chapters, full books, but most importantly, you can add dynamic elements. And 90,000 users have already downloaded the software for doing this. So 90,000 people are already interested in using this to produce textbooks for the iPad specifically. So it's not just the idea of being able to digitize or put digital copies of traditional books and textbooks on the iPad, but with the iPad as the goal, as the intended end screen. And then, of course, there's the iBooks textbooks. And what this is trying to do is tap into the huge market of technical textbooks, which is fabulously profitable, but is well overdue for a shakeup. And the way it works is there's now a textbook category within the iBooks app, and they started off offering books from partners like McGraw-Hill and Mifflin at pretty reasonable prices, at $14.99, which is way lower than we're traditionally used to them, and we'll see what models end up really prevailing here, though. And over 350,000 people have already started downloading textbooks in just the first 3 days of it being available. So this is going to change not only how students encounter textbooks, but of course what the library's role is. And it actually may create instead of change the library's role, because traditionally we don't purchase and provide textbooks. But as long as we can have business models keeping us within that frame and that mobile flow, we very well may be able to. Then something else that happened this month I thought was interesting was a librarian at the University of Nevada at Reno created Facebook profiles for some of her students from 100 years ago. So she was actually in charge of the archives, and as a way of bringing the archives out to her students, she created Facebook profiles for several of their students that were featured back then. And it was a guy and his girlfriend, and they were co-students, and they would populate these Facebook profiles as if they were contemporary students, or as if they lived now. So what they liked, what they did, what they were up to, it was really successful. And the reason I'm aware of this is because Mashable ran a story on it, so they wanted to ask me for my input, so I did an interview for them. And when I was doing that and looking into this, I realized that this isn't really just about using Facebook in an innovative way or using it to broaden the audience of the archives, or ultimately the concept is of these teaching pieces, but really to be able to bring the concept of historical research into contemporary situations. Because we're used to, if we want to learn about a person, a peer currently, what we'll do is we'll check out their Facebook profile, right? So there's no reason that that can't apply to these historical figures. But in a bigger context, what this means is that no longer do students have to be familiar with the tedious resource discovery tools that the library may use. They can use something that they're familiar with in Facebook. But there's also alternative technologies that could be used for this that could make this not just a one-off project, but a trend into the future. So it was great that they did a Facebook profile, although it was a bit disappointing that they didn't update it to a timeline, because that actually would have been just so perfect if they had used Facebook timelines for this. But also, they could have done other things. They could have used Google+, and they could have used Twitter, and since then, just a couple days ago, I saw that a Twitter account from the same person followed me, so apparently they did decide to do that, probably in response to the fact that Facebook actually shut this down. One of the things I said in this interview is actually that what this is looking like is librarians starting to act like social media managers in the technology or media world. And the brand here is the archives or the library, and the marketing campaign was the actual idea of creating these Facebook profiles. So we're not just we're coming closer to in line with other industries and how they're maximizing technology. And Google+, which so many people love to bash, is still continuing to be really successful. Something I thought was cool is just today, President Obama announced that he'll host questions after a State of the Union on a Google+ Hangout, which is a way to use interactive media on Google+ for a certain amount of people at a time. And it's still growing rapidly. It's actually the fastest growing social network of all time, adding, it claims, 600,000 users every day. And at that rate, it can be over 300 million users within a year. And if this continues, then they actually will become a rival to Facebook in not too long. But let's see, I think just the other day they announced reaching 90 million users, which means they are actually keeping up with that growth rate. Now, this is really powerful for libraries and professionals. If you want some details, there was a blog post I wrote a while back with I have a link and a screenshot on the bottom page here, and a lot of libraries have started to play with it. So take a look. Make sure that you use this on your own so you understand what it's like, and then start to delve into what it means for information and for library services. Another really cool statistic I saw today. I like this because it actually was not something I myself fully expected, showing that just in the holiday period, the number of Americans who own an e-reader or a tablet can serve as an e-reader went from 18% to 29%, just in a month. That's a huge growth in a massive amount of any of our end users in our library populations. So this is really, really big, and bigger than I expected. So these e-readers could include, are most likely to include actually the Amazon Fire and the new Nook tablet, because there was no new iPad that came out in this frame, so that didn't have as high as an impact, even though that was included. So e-readers, they're continue to have massive growth. And of course, the way that the more people consume these, the more their expectations for discovery of content and engagement of it is going to change. So it's no longer enough to think that offering ebooks is a side thing. It's going to become the main focus it already has, and it already is in the minds of many, many of our patrons. Now, I actually, when I posted these slides online earlier today, because I had a meeting I had to do this afternoon, I wanted to make sure they're up, and I posted them to SlideShare, and I came back a little while ago to see that apparently people had already discovered this, and it was there's actually a slightly updated version, which I'll put the link to in the chat thing here. I just tweaked a few things, nothing major. And a couple hundred people had already seen it, and SlideShare said it was already featured in the on their homepage. And I find this funny because I only put it there as a bookmark so that I could have it ready for you guys now. And just because of the social nature of content nowadays, it's already received 400 something views. Now, of course, the real content here is in our conversation, but I found that interesting. So I did post a link to these slides here, and I got a couple other things I want to talk about. Just because I'm mentioning that doesn't mean I'm quite done with you. Now, there are several things which I didn't note here because they're still iffy. And one of those is QR codes. QR codes actually are continuing to grow in their visibility and in the number of people that they're available to and who are making use of them. But a lot of people are saying they're transitory. What I think the real future, the real truth of this issue with QR codes is that a major point for discovering and engaging online information now has to do with your physical location. And QR codes are really successful now because they use the visual element of a code combined with the camera common on all smartphones to be able to allow you to have access to digital information. Now, the advent of near-field communication may or may not be a rival to it. It's not a direct competitor in the fact that, like RFID, NFC near-field communication actually uses very short distance of proximity to be able to exchange digital information, but that may be another step in the same direction that QR code's in, of having proximity or the immediacy to a physical element to connect to digital information. And it may be something else in the future. So the more important concept here is that where you are can be your access to information. And with near-field communication, you're supposed to only transfer things over a couple centimeters. But that may also change. We may be able to bring in things like location-based services when we're thinking about content discovery. I think that what the future is going to be is if your smartphone can detect that you're within a library, then you can automatically be authenticated for those proprietary resources that the library provides it for you. So you don't have to anymore have the library card or check out. Just the fact that you're there proves that you're able to, or you're part of the community, or wherever it may be. And that's what I think is going to be one major thing that we don't see right away, but is going to cause a lot of changes. Another thing is there was an application that came out that was quite successful at its launch called Oink. Now, what Oink does is allows you to post a picture of an item or a specific thing at a specific place and rate that item. Their tagline is "Rate the World." And the only reason I did not include a picture of it is even though the concept was really great and popular, it didn't end up being as popular yet in real life. It's not catching on like wildfire like Pinterest is, for instance. But I think that Oink, better than almost any other application that came out at the end of the year, signifies exactly what we can envision the future, or this year at least, the future of technology is going to be. So what's cool with Oink is it uses a location, so it's got that location element. It uses a picture, and it's social, and you get to put feedback in. So it's the way of discovering and adding information to the world around you. So take a look at the Oink app, but don't necessarily jump on it for your library yet. But if you do use it in a professional way, let me know what you're doing with it. Now, what I want to get out of this is making sure that you are all in my personal network. So make sure to stay in touch. Make sure to let me know what trends you're seeing that I'm not necessarily aware of and how they're impacting you. And it's really hard to predict trends throughout the year, but we can do pretty well quarterly. So I'll be doing a lot of these talks in a lot of different places, and I hope that we can share a room or a conversation again about these and share an update. So I'm Library Future on Twitter. And thank you so much. I think we have a couple minutes for questions if you guys have any. Yep, I can.
Okay, well, I have a question. Do you think that Apple's going to own the near future, or do you think there's going to be more of a competition in the sort of e-publishing, dynamic e-publishing world, beyond just Amazon and Apple?
Well, that last caveat that you put in there is really the important one. Those two are absolutely dominating it. Amazon has had a dominating position in this for a long time. Barnes & Noble's Nook technology is fabulous, but Barnes & Noble itself is becoming less and less of an impactful player. In fact, the only profitable section of Barnes & Noble this year was the Nook. And that's more about technology, I think, than necessarily content. So there's still plenty of competition, but Apple really, I think, showed its fangs stronger than people anticipated with these recent changes. They've made great partnerships through their iBooks for the last year, and we're going to continue to see more and more. And it's really interesting that Apple, coming from a technology company, moving into a media distribution type of company as well, is the complete opposite of Amazon's approach. They started with content. And so those two different approaches are both proving very successful and producing very different results. In the end, though, we're going to have to be fully aware of the impact of this duality, and we're going to have to balance it along with what we're already used to. And that's okay, just means we have to stay current.
I have a question about Foursquare.
Okay.
What do you think is the future of Foursquare?
Well, this is a really interesting question. Now, the whole concept of location and proximity used to be dominated actually by the gaming area, by location-based services like Foursquare. And it's matured and changed so much within just the last 2 years. I actually just finished writing a book about location-based services in libraries. And throughout the entire process of writing, it was constantly updating each section because so much is changing. What I think is interesting to watch is that Foursquare has become absolutely dominant in one section of it, the check-in section. And that's perfectly relevant, it will continue to be, but it's not the only story out there. The other half of it is using location as an element to discovery or interaction. When, a year and a half ago now, I think, oh no, it was just last summer when Facebook changed all of its location services. So to de-emphasize the check-in and to emphasize location as an underlying element in other activities. Now I think there's room for both, and there's absolutely room for your library to be doing both. For Foursquare, there really is a future because that's a niche that people have proven to have continued interest in. The cool thing about Foursquare is that it gives you an opportunity to not just interact with a virtual representation of a real-world place like a library, but also to fulfill the social need of sharing. So why it's so popular is because you get to share with your designated social circle your activity associated with that location. And it's continuing to grow, although not nearly as fast as others. The future of Foursquare is stable, but it's not going to continue to guide the future. There's lots of opportunities for using Foursquare in an information environment, though, so if you're thinking about it, absolutely consider it a viable tool for libraries.
There's a couple questions on the chat.
All right, I see one asking if there's anything showing that technology has an effect on usage patronage. Now, oftentimes people will say that you should be pushing social technology or current technologies because you want to be able to adapt to new generations of users. And the way I look at it, maybe more in line with this question, is that each new technology that makes an impact upon the larger audience changes the way that they behave themselves. So it's really about adapting to behaviors. And these technologies are having that impact on the patrons and their behaviors and expectations, and it's up to us to continually keep up. Does that answer the question, Maria? Hope so. If not, let me know or throw something else in the type. And I see a question about augmented reality. Augmented reality is really fabulous, but for some reason it's not catching on as fast as we thought it was. Augmented reality is using a couple of these same elements. Your smartphone that can detect your location, its accelerometer tool with inside so it knows where you're pointing, and digital information associated with a real-world object that it sees through the camera, pulling those together to show an overlay of digital information about the real world. So like a QR code you scan and get information from a code that's on something real, augmented reality looks at something real and tells you what information is associated with that. So this is great because it brings the area of discovery and research outside the library back to the real world. If you can get the information about that object there, that's great. It's really about the way it displays it. So I think augmented reality is great. It's really grown a lot, but for some reason it hasn't caught on as much as we expect, but it doesn't mean it won't. So learn about augmented reality if you haven't. Start playing with it. It's available on most smartphones now. And Maria, you say somewhat. Feel free to clarify, and I will totally try better. And Dr. Krog is asking, what do we know about adoption of social network technologies across different types of libraries? And if you were asking about adoption by the libraries themselves. We've seen for a long time, even though the academic has tried to lead the vanguard, it's the school libraries that have the most considerations and are jumping into the really in-depth issues the fastest. Now, adoption by users, social networking is nearly universal. There's no one who's not on Facebook, for instance. It's defining the way that we engage with each other and how we represent them. Now, every user group is different, but you have a few near universalities. One of those is going to be mobile devices, not just cell phones, but smartphones. The penetration across all demographics is growing dramatically, and with the advanced features of smartphones come more and more social features or direct ties in with social networks. We saw that in Apple's most recent iteration, they tied the hardware directly to Twitter. So using Twitter became an extension of using our devices, and all of this is changing how we're behaving. So there's very few demographics that are not high social network engagers, but of course it's different networks for different groups. What's really important is not trying to hyper analyze the user groups, but be aware of what the major ones are, be perfectly familiar with what the user experience is, and then before you start to think as a librarian, think of as a person of how it's changing the experience, and then adapt the library services to that world. You don't often even have to use a social network. Just be prepared to shift how you do things so it's more in that framework. And I see that.
Okay,
Sorry.
Are there any other questions?
I was just saying, I see that we're over our time now, so I don't want to keep you guys.
Well, thank you to everyone for attending. Thank you, Joe, for presenting.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you all. I really welcome the opportunity, and I hope we can stay in touch.
Thanks for coming, everyone.